Sometimes what seemed brilliant back then was downright dangerous in the long run, and today we're going to uncover 10 perilous tractor features that once roamed the fields, only to vanish over time. It's a revealing look at how safety rules and common sense shape modern agriculture. Let's explore each and see how they worked and discover why they eventually faded. Ready? Let's dive in. Number 10, exposed flywheels and hand cranks. Now, back in the early 1900s, before the era of convenient electric starters, many tractors relied on large exposed flywheels or hand cranks to get their engines going. The principle behind a hand crank was straightforward. You manually rotate the crankshaft until the engine fired. It made sense at a time when battery systems were rudimentary. However, these open flywheels and unshielded hand cranks had a serious downside. If the engine kicked back or misfired, the crank could wrench your arm, fracture bones, and even throw you backwards. According to period accounts documented by the University of Nebraska Tractor Test Lab, novices frequently fell victim to crank-related injuries. Tractors like the early Fordson Model F were notorious for this. The Model F, produced from 1917 to 1928, ushered in affordable mechanization, but it also introduced plenty of hazards. When an inexperienced driver struggled with a starting procedure, a sudden engine kickback could deliver a powerful jolt. Some folks ended up with permanent wrist or shoulder problems. Despite these dangers, many farmers accepted the risk, since having a tractor at all was a major leap forward. Yet, as battery technology and electric starters progressed, manufacturers began offering safer ignition alternatives. By the late 1930s, several brands had integrated electric starters as standard features, and owners realized just how much safer and more convenient this approach was. Hand cranks gradually disappeared, replaced by fully enclosed systems that minimized direct contact with engine components. As the feature fell out of favor, the agricultural world breathed a collective sigh of relief. With fewer manual starting procedures, the potential for painful mishaps dropped dramatically. Though it might seem quaint or nostalgic to recall spinning a hand crank at dawn, there's a reason we said goodbye to this design. Farm life was tough enough without the threat of a broken arm. Number 9 is a tricycle front end. Now, one of the most recognizable images of mid-century farming is the tricycle front-end tractor, with two narrow front wheels spaced close together under the engine. Brands like Farmall popularized this style in the 1930s and 40s, primarily because it provided excellent maneuverability for row crop work. By tucking the wheels neatly in line, operators could navigate tighter spaces and plant rows with precision. It was a practical idea for the time, but not exactly a safe one. The narrow front posed a significant rollover risk on uneven ground. If a wheel dipped into a hole or the tractor was driven too quickly around a turn, the entire machine could topple. Vintage reports from the National Safety Council indicate that rollover accidents were alarmingly common. Operators sometimes forgot just how susceptible these tractors were to tipping, especially when carrying heavy loads or working on slight inclines. Once a tractor began to roll, it was nearly impossible for the driver to jump clear. Farmall's Model H and Model M series exemplified this design, selling hundreds of thousands of units in the U.S. While they did revolutionize row crop farming and became cultural icons, the dangers couldn't be ignored. Over time, farmers and manufacturers recognized that broader front ends and added ballast could drastically improve stability. By the 60s, more robust designs with wider front axles gained traction. Tricycle front-end tractors gradually faded from production as safety regulations tightened, although some still do appear at farm shows and vintage tractor meets. They stand out more, though, as historical curiosities than a practical workhorse. It's easy to feel nostalgic about these slender-nosed tractors with their distinctive silhouettes, but modern machines boast far safer engineering. The evolution away from tricycle fronts is a testament to the lessons learned through countless rollover incidents, improving stability, literally saving lives. Number 8, steel lug wheels. Before rubber tires were the norm, many tractors featured steel wheels that were armed with aggressive metal lugs or cleats. This design was common during the first half of the 20th century, particularly on models like the Fordson Model F and the early Rumley oil pull. Now, manufacturers believed steel lugs delivered superior traction on soft soil by biting into the ground. While they did provide decent grip in a muddy field, these wheels were anything but gentle or safe. Steel lug wheels had a reputation for jolting both the driver and the tractor, creating a bone-rattling ride over a hard surface. The unyielding contact with compacted ground could jar your spine, but the real hazard emerged when those lugs acted like rotating blades. Anyone caught in your path would risk severe injury or death. During the 20s and 30s, reports surfaced of farm workers losing footing near a moving tractor and suffering gruesome leg injuries. Early safety advocates emphasized the inherent danger, but tradition and cost often outweighed caution. Moreover, steel lugs made road travel precarious. Tractors with metal wheels could slip and slide on paved surfaces, lacking any flexibility to conform to uneven roads. Some states even banned lug tractors on highways because they tore up the tarmac. By the late 30s, rubber tire technology had advanced enough to promise both better traction and safer on-road performance. Companies like Firestone aggressively marketed pneumatic tires for farm use, highlighting the cushioned ride and improved grip. As these modern tires became more accessible, the steel lug design slowly faded. Farmers discovered that rubber tires boosted field productivity, reduced operator fatigue, and lowered the risk of damaging roads or injuring bystanders. Looking back, steel lug wheels might conjure images of a rugged pioneer era of mechanized farming, but they also symbolize a time when safety was often an afterthought. Replacing them undoubtedly spared many from harm. Number 7 is the unshielded power takeoff shafts. Now, one of the most significant innovations in tractor technology was the power takeoff shaft, introduced to transfer engine power to implements like mowers, balers, or augers. Early tractor models with PTOs, including certain Allis-Chalmers and John Deere lines in the 1930s, lacked protective shielding around the rotating shaft. This submission was convenient for hooking and unhooking implements, but it posed a serious risk to anyone who got too close. A spinning PTO can rotate at hundreds of revolutions per minute, and loose clothing, hair, or even a careless hand can become entangled in seconds. Farm accident reports from the mid-20th century are rife with stories of horrific PTO injuries. Some individuals lost limbs after being pulled into the machinery, while others endured debilitating injuries short of amputation. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health later highlighted unguarded PTO shafts as a top cause of farm workplace accidents, urging manufacturers and operators to install proper guards. In the 40s and 50s, tractor companies began providing optional PTO shields, but many farmers removed them for convenience. Some felt the shield got in the way when swapping implements, failing to realize how critical it was for personal safety. Over time, regulations and educational campaigns stressed the importance of keeping PTO guards in place. By the late 20th century, it became standard for tractors to feature fully enclosed PTO systems, with explicit warnings against operating them without guards. While we reflect on unshielded PTO shafts, it's clear how vital engineering improvements have been. Something as simple as protective cover can prevent life-altering injuries. Those older, open PTO systems might look classic in museum pieces, but in reality, they represent an era when convenience often overshadowed safety. Today, shielded PTO assemblies are a testament to how far we've come. Number 6, lack of rollover protection structures. Tractor rollovers remain one of the leading causes of farm-related fatalities. In the early to mid-1900s, tractors were manufactured without rollover protection structures. Many operators believed that they could simply jump clear if the tractor tipped. The assumption was dangerously optimistic. When a tractor rolled, it often happened with startling speed, leaving little time to react. Now, victims of these accidents commonly found themselves pinned beneath heavy steel. International Harvester, John Deere, and other major brands didn't initially equip their machines with ROPS frames or cabs, or rollover protection structures. Now, mostly because the technology wasn't mandated and consumers weren't eager to pay extra. According to data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, rollover accidents climbed sharply as tractors became more powerful and widespread. On slopes and uneven terrain, the risk would multiply. By the 60s, agricultural safety specialists began pushing for standardized rollover protection on all new tractors, citing a surge in injury and fatality statistics. It wasn't until the 70s that many countries established regulations requiring ROPS on new tractors. Meanwhile, older models continued to operate, lacking any form of rollover guard. Retrofitting ROPS was an option, but the cost and effort deterred many owners. Over time, public awareness campaigns drove home a sobering point. Installing rollover protection could mean the difference between life and death. The introduction of ROPS systems revolutionized tractor safety. Simple in concept, 4 sturdy posts forming a protective frame. ROPS provided a vital survival zone if the machine overturned. Coupled with seat belts, they drastically reduced the likelihood of being crushed. Reflecting on the days before ROPS underscores how farm safety really has progressed. While older tractors may be nostalgic treasures at antique shows, more modern operators wouldn't dream of working without a protective frame overhead. Number 5 is poorly positioned exhausts and fumes. In the quest for a simpler design, many older tractors placed exhaust pipes in precarious positions, sometimes directly in front of the operator station or beneath the seat. Early models like the John Deere Model B or the Farmall F-Series occasionally routed exhaust fumes right where the driver would breathe them in. These fumes weren't just unpleasant, they were a genuine health hazard. Prolonged inhalation of exhaust gases, especially in poorly ventilated sheds, could lead to dizziness or worse. Carbon monoxide, a colorless and odorless gas, was a silent threat. Operators could work for hours in these conditions without realizing the risk. There were also issues with hot exhaust pipes being situated near a footrest or control. One misstep could result in a nasty burn. In the era before prominent warning labels, farmers had to learn the hazards on their own, often through painful experiences. Adding to the danger, sparks from exposed exhaust systems could ignite dry crop residue. Historical accounts indicate that barn fires were sometimes traced back to a tractor's improperly shielded exhaust. Manufacturers eventually recognized that routing the muffler vertically away from the operator was safer, reducing both the chance of accidental burns and the risk of inhaling toxic fumes. By the 1950s, many new tractors featured vertical stacks rising above the bonnet, which improved muffler designs that diverted exhaust away from the cab. Now, over time, stricter environmental standards and growing awareness of respiratory dangers led to more advanced exhaust treatments, like a catalytic converter on modern diesel engines. Modern tractors often came with fully integrated, insulated exhaust systems that reduce noise, heat, and emissions. Looking back at these early setups, it's not surprising that poor exhaust placement is rarely seen nowadays. The move to safer, cleaner exhaust designs has helped protect farmers and the communities all around them. Number 4 is a belt pulley drive without a shield. In the first half of the 20th century, many tractors included a belt pulley mechanism on the side. This flat belt system was used to power stationary equipment like a thresher, corn sheller, or a sawmill. The tractor's engine could spin a large belt pulley, which linked up with another pulley on the implement. For farms without electricity or stationary power sources, it was a game changer, yet these belts often ran fully exposed, lacking any protective guard. Loose clothing or a careless hand near a spinning belt could lead to a serious injury, and if the belt snapped under tension, it could thrash around violently. Historical farm publications account incidents where workers were struck by broken belts or pulled into the path of the machinery. The push for using guards was modest at first, as many found shielding made it awkward to attach or realign the belt. Moreover, early pulley attachments were fairly rudimentary, and farmers often resorted to makeshift solutions for tension and alignment. Tractors like the Farmall Regular or the Oliver 70, which we have spoken about a lot on this channel already, frequently featured a side belt pulley that drove tasks like threshing. They helped small-scale farms become more self-reliant, transforming how crops were processed. However, as engines and belts grew in power, the potential for accidents increased. By the post-war era, safety advocates were urging manufacturers to provide optional guard kits or to rethink how external power was delivered. Over time, the belt pulley gave way to PTO-driven implements, which were easier to shield. Those who still employed belt pulleys were advised to install covers or maintain a wide distance from the whirring parts. As technology evolved, the once ubiquitous belt pulley fell out of favor. While it holds a special place in tractor lore, the sight of an unguarded belt pulley today serves as a stark reminder of the old precarious ways of powering farm implements. Number 3, the minimal operator platforms and no seat restraints. Many early tractors supported a simple metal seat perched atop the transmission casing or differential housing, with virtually no protective enclosures around the operator. This minimalist setup was a carryover from horse-drawn equipment, where a basic seat was all that was needed. However, as tractors grew heavier and more powerful, the absence of a proper platform, footrests, or restraint systems turned them into potential death traps. Sometimes the seating area was so cramped that the driver had to operate pedals perilously close to moving parts. On older John Deere two-cylinder models, for example, operators sat above an exposed transmission and rotating shafts. One slip of the boot and you could be thrown off balance or snag a trouser leg. Historical accounts indicate that farmers occasionally tumbled from these seats while traversing bumpy terrain, risking serious injury if a rear wheel or an attached implement passed over them. Without seat restraints or enclosed cabs, the operator was at the mercy of an uneven field. A hidden rock or a small ditch could jolt the driver off the seat. Rollovers were even more lethal, since there was nothing to stop the ejection. Now, by the mid-20th century, though, tractors became faster, and awareness grew about the importance of a safer operator station. Manufacturers began adding larger footboards, raised fenders, and eventually seatbelts, though broad adoption did take some time. By the 70s and 80s, many tractor lines included cabs that fully enclosed the operator station. These cabs offered weather protection and drastically reduced the chance of being thrown out. Seatbelts combined with ROPS became standard in several regions. Looking back at those rickety perches of old, it's astonishing that more people weren't hurt. The shift to safer, fully enclosed cabs was one of the greatest leaps forward in farm machinery design. Number 2, the dangerous steering mechanisms. During the first half of the 20th century, power steering on tractors was virtually unheard of, and the steering mechanisms could be downright treacherous. Early mechanical steering systems used a basic gearbox and linkage from a steering wheel to the front axle. If a front tire encountered a rock or a tree root, the steering wheel could jolt violently, straining or even dislocating the driver's wrist. On rough fields, wrestling with these tractors for control was just part of the job. Certain Massey Harris models from the 1940s were lauded for their robust design, yet operators frequently complained about stiff or erratic steering when crossing uneven ground. The front wheel might whip to one side if it struck a furrow at just the wrong angle, catching the driver unprepared. In addition, poor steering geometry could exacerbate rollovers, especially for a tricycle front-end machine. Lacking hydraulic assistance, drivers often had to muster considerable strength, making it tough for older or smaller individuals to manage safely. A further complication was the exposed steering linkage. On many vintage tractors, the drag link or tie rods ran dangerously close to the operator's feet. A sudden impact could send the steering bar lurching, causing a foot slip or a hefty bruise. Once manufacturers noticed how many farmers were adding makeshift power steering kits, they began incorporating hydraulic solutions in the 1950s and 60s. John Deere's power steering became a standout feature on some models, allowing smoother control and cutting down on steering-related accidents. As engineering progressed, tractors adopted better steering ratios and eventually fully integrated hydraulic systems. By the 70s and 80s, finding a brand new tractor without power steering was increasingly unlikely. The evolution of tractor steering highlights just how user feedback and practical necessity drove safety improvements. Dangerous steering might seem like a minor design flaw, but for farmers spending long days in the seat, it was a major source of injury risk. Number 1, the lack of lights and reflectors. In the early 20th century, tractors were viewed almost exclusively as field workhorses, seldom venturing far onto a public road. As a result, lighting and reflectors were frequently ignored. Early Fordson and Farmall models did not come with standard headlights or taillights, making it nearly impossible to see or be seen in low-light conditions. In rural areas with minimal street lighting, an unlit tractor on a country road was a disaster waiting to happen. Collisions became tragically common when motorists failed to notice a slow-moving tractor until it was too late. Rear-end crashes were rampant, and the problem was usually the tractor's lack of reflective markings. Even on the farm, maneuvering around outbuildings at dusk posed risks when you couldn't make out the terrain. Over time, farmers added improvised lamps, occasionally repurposing car headlights. But these fix-ups were often unreliable. By the 1950s and 60s, various states began mandating at least basic lighting for tractors that were traveling on public roads. Manufacturers followed suit, offering models with rudimentary headlights, taillights, and reflective triangles. The slow-moving vehicle, or SMV emblem, an orange triangle with red borders, was introduced in the mid-60s, dramatically cutting down roadway accidents involving farm equipment. Nowadays, modern tractors boast comprehensive lighting systems, from high-intensity headlamps to flashing beacons, ensuring that they stay visible in virtually any environment. Recalling the era before reliable lighting underscores how critical visibility is to safety. Countless accidents and near misses could have been prevented with lights and reflectors that we now take for granted. So if you ever ended up behind a modern tractor at twilight, you can credit these early safety advocates for making certain that you spot it from a distance. And there you have it, 10 dangerous tractor features that once ruled our fields but are now best left in the past. Hey, remembering these bygone designs reminds us how far we've come in keeping operators safe and more comfortable. We hope you found the video helpful and that it stirred some memories of farming days gone by. And if you've got your own stories of these old machines, share them in the comments and keep tuning in for more deep dives into the world of classic farming. And don't forget to subscribe for future videos. And hey, happy tractor spotting.